So it's funny how everybody who's talking about disarming police and how we don't need law enforcement anymore is all of a sudden freaking out about the coronavirus and what's going to happen when cops get sick, huh?
Well, it's surely our responsibility to, take care of public safety, and if there is anything that's going to happen around the potential vaccine coming out over this or a majority of people getting sick, think about the law enforcement officers and how they're going to deal with this if departments have 4 or 5 officers that are out for an extended period of time.
Welcome to Law Enforcement Today. Considering everybody in America is talking about the coronavirus, I figured we should too, because I went into Costco the other day and there were no free samples being given out, and so that really sort of put things in perspective for me.
No hand sanitizer either.
No hand sanitizer, no Clorox. You're limited to 1 pack of paper towels, toilet paper, flour, sugar, bottled water, because apparently it's not just the coronavirus, it's a pending snowstorm that's coming. Whole idea of this show is that we take on the topics that you don't necessarily see taken on in the mainstream media. This guy, a lieutenant, takes things on from the coronavirus already got me. Civil service perspective, civilian perspective. We take on the topics that you guys send in. Everybody wants to talk about the coronavirus. Let's talk about it. Forget 5 or 6 cops being out. What happens if you're all sick? What happens if you're all quarantined? Because that's what we're seeing, right? You had up in Seattle at the onset of this, there were a couple of cops and a couple of firefighters that went into a nursing home and they were quarantined. So first of all, does the idea of a quarantine even really work? Number one, or is it more for public show? And number 2, what happens if you all get quarantined?
Well, I think certainly there's a value to quarantining somebody who's exposed or somebody who's showing symptoms. So, for a law enforcement agency, especially smaller agencies out there, if they have several officers that are now quarantined, that puts a burden on that department to be able to respond to calls for service, to be able to respond to emergency calls. Now, take that into account with these larger agencies who could have a mass amount of their officers exposed at one time. What are they going to do? It's certainly going to come down to what departments do to ensure the safety of the officers, try to mitigate their exposure, ensure they have the proper PPE going into these calls. But it's definitely on the minds of, I think, most police administrators out there.
So let's run the scenario here, right? People talk all the time about the need for a blue flu, where all of a sudden every cop calls out sick. Other people talk about disarming law enforcement, or how we should no longer have law enforcement. They envision a country without it. So let's run that scenario for a second. What does America look like with a week without any law enforcement?
Absolute chaos. Absolute chaos. Law enforcement is out there to protect and serve. Law enforcement is out there to ensure the safety of the public. Now you take away law enforcement from that equation, and who's ensuring the safety of others? Is it you? Is it your neighbor? Is there anything that you're going to do to get across town and stop an emergency situation? I don't think so. The world without law enforcement would, like I said, be pure chaos. So we have to do what we have to do to make sure that we are able and capable of responding to emergencies and maintaining public safety. Part of that is making sure that we mitigate officers' exposure to this. Now, that's relatively impossible if this spreads.
You're hedging right now. I don't want to hear about 1 or 2. Let's get dark for a second, man. Let's talk about all the way down the road. And I think you're afraid to have this conversation because you're afraid, as I think we all are, of what that America looks like. Because let's say we went 3 weeks without any law enforcement. At what point, because now at some point law and order will return. Now let's think about what that looks like. The court systems being completely overwhelmed. Law enforcement being overwhelmed with the investigative side of things, with people who say, well, listen, that guy came into my house to steal my food or my medicine or harm my family, and so I killed him. I mean, what does this look like? We think about the chaos of having an agency down by 25%. But imagine a country where we have lost critical services for a month. It's not just that week or that month or that 3 weeks, it's the aftermath of trying to rebuild society. I mean, think about the big snowstorm we had a few years ago up here in New England where people lost power for a week. I saw fistfights at the gas station. I mean, that was a week without power. Now imagine a month without law enforcement. Can America withstand that?
For all you out there, Kyle thinks about these doomsday scenarios often, and this just gives him a platform to even go further with it. But I think for
my whiskey wall is my barter
yes,
system.
I
just want
know.
to be clear about that.
But for law enforcement officials out there, this is certainly something we have to think about.
Of course.
We have to think about what is going to happen if a majority of the department or an entire department is now quarantined for exposure. It's something that we have to think about in terms of, like I said, mitigating that exposure and doing what we have to do to protect ourselves so that we can protect the public. And if law enforcement administrators out there aren't taking this into consideration right now, they're doing a disservice.
But what do? You have a melee at a mall, right? Are you all of a sudden all going to put on PPE to go in to stop that melee?
No, the same thing. We're not going to hesitate to run into gunfire.
Right.
That's what we do.
Right. You pull someone over and they're coughing and sneezing. Okay, you're going to decontaminate the best you can after with whatever hand sanitizer is left, but what steps should departments be taking now to put in place? Like, what is a reasonable step and what is overkill and what's not enough?
You know, I think making sure that PPE is stocked in a department. I think making sure that officers are educated on the signs and symptoms so that if they are exposed, they can come forward to their sergeant, to their lieutenant, to their chief and say, listen, I went to this call, this person was exhibiting these symptoms. I don't know necessarily, and nor are we going to ask the person, but I certainly think there's steps that we can take to try to mitigate that exposure. PPE is definitely something that, you know, my department is considering. If something comes down where our jurisdiction is now showing signs that we are having a exponential growth in the number of patients that are exhibiting signs of the coronavirus, certainly we're going to take extra steps in responding to calls because we don't know who could potentially be exposed. It's not something that I'm going to think about walking into a building, walking into a residence to respond to an emergency situation where there's a domestic violence incident occurring. It's just not something we're going to do. We're still going to do what we have to do to ensure public safety, but at the same time, we have to think about how are we going to mitigate the risk of being exposed to something like this. Now, this is a big question for, you know, the United States as a whole right now. Because as this grows, certainly we are going to have to take extra steps because we are out in the public. We are responding to residences. We are responding to hospitals. And if this grows to a point where we're taking security of health facilities, we're going to have to definitely have some PPE on hand. So,
well, and I want to stress something too, is that it doesn't matter whether or not this particular situation is overblown, because people will argue both ways. People will argue a lot of it's hype. People will argue it's legit. But I'll tell you, man, having been in Costco twice on Friday, once because we were picking up some staff there, and the other time because I needed to pick up stuff, it was chaos. And people were going in there, you could buy, you know, you had limits of 1 pack of paper towels, 1 pack of toilet paper, 1 pack of sugar, 1 pack of flour, 1 pack of water. They were out of Lysol wipes, out of Clorox wipes, out of rubbing alcohol. Went into Target yesterday, the shelves were cleared out. And so I think, you know, how many of us for years have made fun of that prepper mindset? But I'll tell you what, those dudes who have a basement stocked up with Lysol wipes right now are laughing at everybody else. So it doesn't matter whether or not the coronavirus is overhyped or underhyped. It's an awakening to America of how vulnerable we are, especially when a supply chain is interrupted, which is what we're seeing out of China. What do you think the takeaway for people should be from all of this, no matter how it pans out?
Be prepared. Be prepared for something. Like you said, I think preppers out there who have stockpiled supplies are certainly in a good situation right now in terms of being able to get things that they need. Looking forward, that's something that should be on the mindset of people. You know, what do I have? What's my supply for? How long can I last? How long can I keep my family fed? And taking those steps now based on where we are today so that in the future, they're prepared. You know, one thing I want to talk about, when we talk about public safety and not only law enforcement, but you talk about firefighters, EMS, you know, we had an incident over the weekend where there was a mass casualty incident in relation to a fire. And a fire department, as well as other fire departments, responded and did what they had to do. You know, we don't think about, is there a person who has coronavirus in that building that's burning down with how many victims, how many unknown victims inside? We don't think about those things when we respond to calls where somebody's life is in danger. We just go. So it's not only law enforcement, it's firefighters, EMS, anybody who is in that public service area that has to think about those things, but in reality, we're going to do the job that needs to be done to ensure public safety.
Be safe, be healthy. Thank you all for hitting the share button. Thanks for engaging in sort of an awkward conversation at times, but these are the conversations that we have to be having. As always, we leave you with the faces of those who paid the ultimate price here in America so far in 2020, set to Dave Ray's last call. Thank you all. God bless America.
Man down, I'm bleeding out. There's no time, so please hear me out. These are the last few words that I'd like to say to you all. This is my last call. Tell my wife I love her and that I won't be home tonight. Thank her for those long, hard years that we